Welcome to Babblecom 5. This is episode 14 of season 4 of Babylon 5, Moments of Transition. William Edgars has another job for Mr. Garibaldi, and he's not overly fussed about his sleep patterns as it turns out. Apparently he's already on the payroll, so he can't say much about it. He's still dealing with packages because apparently others are not sufficiently trustworthy to deliver them. He inquires as to when they might meet in person, but is given no particular promise of that happening. Sheridan is having difficulty sleeping out of concern for Delenn, who is still out of contact, having landed on Minbar. Even the officer in C&C tries to reassure him that she'll be okay. However, the capital is indeed in flames, and wounded religious caste Minbari are taking shelter where they can as the warrior caste continue their assault. Lanier tells Delenn that the warrior caste have surrounded the city and threaten to destroy it if there is no surrender by tomorrow for the good of the people. Lita is having a promising job interview, right up until the point where she is forced to admit that she isn't currently licensed by Psycor. This puts the dampers on the whole deal, because while she's well suited to commercial telepath work, the firm's insurance only pays out if the telepath is registered with the Corps. She's only operating on Babylon 5 with Sheridan's permission, so she's clearly facing a struggle to make ends meet. On Minbar, Naroon is welcomed back by his leader Shakiri, who seems far more at ease with the situation than Naroon. He says buildings can be reconstructed and the dead reborn into the next generation, perhaps even as warrior caste. He says that whilst religious castes like Delenn value life above death, he believes that for warriors neither life nor death carry different weight, simply being part of the cycle of obligation and release. Naroon's faith suggests he is not as at ease with this as a concept. Shakiri believes that when Delenn sees enough death around her, she will surrender. As Zack manages newcomers, he notices Garibaldi dealing with someone off to the side of the normal queue, but his attempt to reach him is blocked by the arrival of one Mr. Bester, who tries to assure Zack that his presence here on what is purported to be a free port is for Psycor business and he will not be harassing any of the command staff. Zack says he'll have to check with the captain and disengages, leaving two of his men to have their genetic quality questioned by Mr. Bester while he waits. Zack catches up with an elusive Garibaldi who refuses to confirm or deny whether he's working with Edgars, of whom Zack says there are no pictures. Garibaldi dismisses his concerns, saying they always undervalued him, whilst here they've appropriated military assets to suit their own purposes, so they're not whiter than white either. On Minbar, as day breaks, Delenn tells Lanier that she has spoken with the others and asks him to tell the warrior caste that they will surrender at a place of their choosing. Lanier tries to speak to her, but she quietly tells him just to send the message. Bester finds Lita as Ivanova reports the defection of a Starflower squadron to the Proxima Resistance, and he of course has a proposition for her. Psycor has had requests for references that have made him aware that she's job hunting, noting that whilst the other command staff get paid from docking fees and get meals and clothing for free, she does not. Being a freedom fighter does not pay well, it seems, so he offers her a solution. Become classed as a covert Psycor agent, which he can arrange, and she can stop being a rogue. 10% of her income would go to the Corps as usual, and she would have to wear the badge and gloves as Talia did. The other part of the deal? He gets her body. Not like that, but when she's not using it anymore, provided she dies of natural causes. And he raises the interesting point that a P5 is always a P5. They have no way of reliably improving that position, but the Vorlons upgraded her. If she dies, that secret could be lost, but Bester knows that Sheridan won't hand her over unless she signs up his power of attorney willingly. After a moment's consideration, she says she'd rather pull a bullet in her head, and leaves. Bester will apparently be around for a few days should she change her mind. Garibaldi watches on. Naroon suggests that the surrender be done on Minbar, in contrast to the Grey Council who remained on their cruiser at all times. There is a temple called Varini, where disputes used to be settled in the days before Valen, that can transmit proceedings worldwide to quell further disagreements about the caste war. It will also signal a return to the old ways. As for Delenn, Shakiri tells Naroon that in time she would sow dissension once more, so while she can return to Babylon 5, he can also guarantee that her ship will not arrive there. Zack comes to see Lita with bad news. With the Vorlons gone and her lacking a steady income, she will have to move into smaller quarters as the station needs all the credits it can muster. He also asks her for a favour, a scan of one Michael Garibaldi, without his permission. She immediately refuses, saying if it was anyone else she might perhaps consider it, but he was the first person she met on the station. She understands why Zack is asking, but she has to refuse even though she could use the money, and he apologises for upsetting her. He's noticeably tactile with her, but one assumes she'd be able to read any notions he was getting that went beyond friendship. Shortly after, Mr. Garibaldi is seeing his clientele, this time a gentleman looking for his cat and dog, willing to pay time and a half. The pets have plans for the galaxy, apparently. Super. Then Lita arrives on her job-seeking mission, and whilst Garibaldi doesn't trust telepaths, it's her, and it would annoy Bester. Plus, she's happy to admit to him that her abilities are longer range than her P5 rating might suggest. Just then, Bester turns up, only to tell Garibaldi he's not worth bothering with anymore, but then according to Lita, he scans him, leading Garibaldi to chase him down and accost him before security step in to restrain him. Whilst Bester appears well pleased with himself, he immediately encounters Zack on the stairwell. On Minbar, Delenn passes Lennier a scroll with instructions as they enter the temple, and they meet with the warriors with many Minbari watching on. Delenn duly surrenders, with Shakiri gloating, until she politely interrupts. She says that one side surrendering is the natural conclusion to any conflict, but they have not surrendered their right to participate in government. There will be no warrior council, because if the warriors are returning to the ways of their people before Valen, then it was in this place, in the old days, that their leaders were chosen. Each of the warring caste leaders, the ones not normally sent out to die on the front line, would enter the Starfire wheel and suffer it until one left. The one who remained and their caste would then be dominant. As the wheel opens further, Delenn steps into the column of energy and asks Shakiri if he will follow her into fire. And he is clearly very reluctant to do so. Delenn tells Lennier to follow her instructions. Now she is in the fire, she cannot leave. Naroon now challenges Shakiri, asking him what he is prepared to do if life and death are the same, and death simply a release from obligations. Is he afraid? So finally, long after Delenn has stepped in, he joins her, but immediately seems to struggle compared to her, trying to persuade her to share power and leave with him. She says he should have thought of that before starting to destroy their world. He hurls himself out, clothes smoking, but Delenn remains, lifting her hands to the wheel as it intensifies. Naroon does not understand, telling Lennier when she proposed this, she said she would have leave after Shakiri, but Lennier says she is making a stand for all their people. As she finally crumples to the ground, Naroon cries out and goes in after her, fighting to pick her up and pass her out to Lennier, as he in turn raises his hands and declares the war over, and that he was born warrior caste, but the calling of his heart is religious. The wheel clicks to its maximum aperture, and he is incinerated, as Delenn and Shakiri watch on. William Edgars disturbs Mr. Garibaldi's sleep again to tell him that whilst he works for him, he cannot employ a telepath. He might be developing a serum to help them, but he does not trust them, and will not employ one, even second-hand. Bester watches on at a distance as Garibaldi delivers the bad news to Lita. August 3rd, 2261, Bester's personal log. Bingo! By provoking Garibaldi, he has driven the wedge deeper between him and the command staff and set him further down the path he wants him to take. Plus Lita has put on the gloves and badge. Call it a bank shot. Yes, I've had a nice day, he says. On a war cruiser, Lennier helps Delenn along the corridor. She is not fully recovered, but feels she cannot wait to do this in case the instability returns. So she steels herself and enters into the chamber where the Grey Council once united their people, and now she seeks to rebuild it, calling 2 religious and 2 warrior caste members. But whilst broadcasting to the people, she then calls on the remaining 5 spots to be filled by the worker caste, the ones who build temples and ships that endure. Now they will be given the chance to build the future of their people, with religion and war as advisors, rather than being subservient to their wishes. Now war and religion will serve the people, not the other way round. The final place, the centre spot, she removes herself from. It will be left empty in honour of Neroon, for the one who will be. And so the council is made into a new whole. On the station, Ivanova storms into Sheridan's quarters, incandescent with outrage. Sheridan doesn't know what's happened, so she shows him the footage as she explains that civilian ships were trying to escape Proxima when an Earth destroyer jumped in and cut them to shreds. 10,000 dead, crammed in like sardines. Their only crime, trying to escape a war zone. At that moment, Sheridan effectively declares war on the Clark's forces, whether or not they themselves are ready. Ivanova protests that the ship's crews are following orders, but Sheridan says that anyone following such orders is guilty of war crimes and is a legitimate target. So they'll take the colonies back, then Mars, then Earth itself, and nothing will stand in their way. So, moments of transition indeed. Neroon shifts from warrior to religious, the Grey Council shifts to worker dominance, Lita is forced to go back to the core, Sheridan goes to war. Let's talk about Neroon first, because this was a terrific turnabout. You can see from his facial expression when he gets back to Shakiri that he is not on the same page as him, despite having theoretically completed his mission. We weren't sure, of course, where he stood at the end of the previous episode, and indeed he's still playing Warrior Cast at the start of this episode, but that's all he's doing, playing. The more he hears, the more he realises how far removed he is from his leader's point of view. Then comes the actual betrayal with Minbar watching, calling his leader out for his weakness, essentially goading him into joining Delenn long after she subjected herself to the wheel. And then the real twist, when he expected Delenn to remove herself from the wheel, he instead sacrifices himself in her place, managing to declare the war over and his true calling as religious before he is incinerated. It's an incredible character journey for one who was so steadfastly warrior cast at the start of the series. But as Delenn said last episode, his strongest trait was ever his loyalty to his people as a whole, and that transcended the warrior cast's power trip. So yes, he has a terrific arc. Delenn's plan is also brilliant, if risky. Watching this now, I found it a little surprising she would be prepared to risk herself like this with John in her life, but ultimately she was the chosen of Dukat, so she would do everything she could to save her people, and would probably have left a message for John explaining her actions in the scroll she passed to Lanier, as he did for her when he went to Zahadum. Definitely echoes there. She clearly did trust Neroon a lot, because he could simply have picked a different spot for the surrender that would have derailed her entire plan. Again, very clever, because Shakiri was not intelligent enough to realise what he might be walking into by going to that particular place. I have to mention the overall effects work for Minbar here. The virtual outdoor scenes were incredible for their day and showed us far more of Minbar than we'd ever seen before, even if it was in flames. But I guess you can see this as the second of a two-parter, which really merited pulling the stops out. Finally, still struggling after her incredible ordeal, we see Delenn heal what she originally broke by placing not the religious caste but the worker caste in a dominant position on the Grey Council. She reached out to them before during Severed Dreams, and as she observes, they're the ones making the ships, building the temples. There is no Minbari society without them. So now war and religion will be forced to take a step back and help them build the future. It's a hell of a turnaround in just one episode, and it isn't even all focused on them, yet it works. So Lita, she really does get a crappy deal here. Forced to move into smaller quarters just when she'd got hers sorted out, blocked from jobs she could otherwise do just because she's not with the Corps. Also strangely ostracised by the command staff, despite her having been a huge help during the Shadow War. I guess the general mistrust of telepaths, and especially ones as powerful as her, runs deep. Although it sounds as if she might have been getting some support, she obviously doesn't want to ask for more if she can help it. Zack is between a rock and a hard place because she's not part of the chain of command as such, so as Bester observes, she doesn't get the same treatment. It's a pretty short-sighted attitude ultimately. Would you really want a Vorlon class telepath upset at you? But yes, there's also a lot else going on to pull attention away from her. I'm actually wondering how the businesswoman got on board to talk to her, also Bester, given the Earth embargo, but presumably they can travel on alien ships if need be, and Bester would have ways and means in particular. His manipulation of her and Garibaldi is spot on, of course, and this is perhaps the most overt sign we've seen yet that he may have had a hand in whatever was done to Mr. Garibaldi to put him on this current path. Here too we see Edgar's is very anti-telepaths, being close to his organisation, and very secretive. No one actually knows what he looks like. We certainly haven't seen him, only heard him. Yet Mr. Garibaldi seems to want a face-to-face with him. He deflects when Garibaldi suggests his attitude is odd, considering he's bringing in materials to try and find a cure for a disease afflicting telepaths. It's clearly devastating for Lita to have her hopes of working with him dashed, because it was the first positive she'd had all episode, and forces her to enter into the Faustian deal offered by Bester. Not for nothing is he everyone's favourite villain on the series. Yet he does make a very compelling argument from his point of view. Psy-Corps can't upgrade its telepaths. It has to play the hand it's dealt with, even with their arranged procreation approach, and she could be the key to unlocking far more potential in them. Looking at it that way, he's actually being remarkably restrained, although he must appreciate he probably couldn't take her by force, even if he wanted to. There are also some nice Sheridan moments here where he's trying to establish what's happening with Delenn on Minbar. It's very human of him. So too is his reaction after Ivanova's finished venting at the treatment of civilians by Clark's forces. A line has clearly been crossed in his head, and he now feels justified in taking direct action against Earth forces that are carrying out illegal orders, regardless of whatever ISN might have to say about it. Interesting that even Ivanova is quick to point out that they are, after all, orders, and as we know, Clark has a habit of manipulating the facts to suit his own narrative, so for all the crew know, the escaping ships were full of traitors. Logically, however, there would be alternatives to out-and-out blowing them up. Starfuries could easily have taken out their engines. Destroying them is just a way to send a message to the breakaway colonies, but as we know, that has a tendency to cause the opposite of the desired effect. So with the Shadow War not long over, we now find ourselves on the cusp of a more personal war, with the Sheridan grimly determined to free Earth and its colonies from Clark's grasp. No small task. Yet he now has the support of the League of Non-Aligned Worlds and Delenn to call on, together with the White Star fleet. And we heard news of Starfuries defecting to Proxima 3, which means that Clark is not in full control of all Earth forces. So we've got about a third of the season left to see how all this pans out. It's worth pausing to consider at this point that we've gone from Centauri Prime to Narn to Minbar already this season. Remarkable how far the series has grown from just being about the last of the Babylon stations, isn't it? So join me next week and we'll see how things progress from here.